Season 9 of Night School is presented by the AQHA. Bet on this weekend's AQHA Challenge races at Prairie Meadows. Keeneland Select, where new players can earn a $150 sign-up bonus. Woodbine. Watch and wager on this weekend's Rico Woodbine Mile, contested Saturday, September 14th. Remington Park. Thoroughbred action is back. Live racing Thursday through Sunday. And ExpressBet. Fund your account for free and get free past performances at expressbet.com.
Horses have off days, and by looking at them before they actually get on the racetrack, you get an initial impression of which way they're leaning.
This is going to sound crazy, but for me, it's intellectual stimulation.
Class is now in session. It's time for Night School. Here are your hosts.
Welcome to Night School, everyone. I'm Jeremy Plonk from Horse Player Now as we bring you into the National Online Fan Education Program, season number 9, into the second semester. It's Woodbine Mile week this week, so north of the border. Good day, eh? And I welcome in Brian W. Spencer as we talk turf sprints, and Euros in a very important grass week.
Yeah, and obviously one of the most unique grass courses in North America, Woodbine, that E.P. Taylor turf course. They've now got that new inner turf course, so they can run just about as many turf races as they want. Big weekend there up in Canada. But, we've seen an increase in turf races, the increase in number of turf sprints we're seeing too. So this is a topic that is becoming more important as we're talking about, multi-race wagers, and you've got to encounter you're going to encounter some of these races, turf sprints, turf routes, European invaders, all those kind of things are going to be forced into your handicapping sooner or later. So to try to get a handle on them is a really big key, especially for some of those big days when we do see those European invaders.
And all turf courses are not created equally, so just when you talk turf racing, there are some of those putting green type turf courses that are very short crop, like we see a lot in Southern California and Louisiana at Ellis Park. Some of these really races where these courses where the horses really get over them, the turf is extremely firm, short crop grass, and in other big lush courses like Arlington or Woodbine, where it's deeper and more European. So you've got to get to know your turf courses as well. That can be a big difference. Some horses do very well on the short crop turf, and some do better on the deeper turf courses. So get a look at that, and don't just default to the turf record of a horse. Actually look specific. The turf course record, how they've done over a particular course, can be very important to you here when handicapping turf races. Why do turf races appeal so much to us as horse players? Larger field sizes, plain and simple. And we expect to get bigger payoffs, Brian, when we get to the turf. 9-2 average winner on the turf compared to about 7-2 on the dirt. This is what you're looking for as a gambler. You're looking for opportunities to make scores, and the turf tends to offer that because of those field sizes.
Yeah, and you just mentioned that number about how those turf races overall pay about a point better than dirt races, and that's only in the top spot. That's to say nothing of whether you can rope a 30-1 long shot into second or third if you're playing those intra-race gimmicks. So those big fields and sort of the unpredictability of turf racing, when you think of how, when you watch races, when they turn for home in turf races, how many times are there 5, 6, 7 chances left in a dirt race? How many times are there 2, maybe 3 chances left? So, you get tighter bunched fields with softer paces, generally speaking. So, you keep more horses in the mix, too, which leads to traffic, leads to trips. There's just a lot more intangibles, I think, in turf racing, and that's where you can use trip notes, you can look for some prices, and that's really what is most appealing about turf racing, whether it's going short or long on a big scale or a small scale.
Some of the things you're looking for on the turf, maybe not as much as pace handicapping, because setting up the pace in turf isn't the same. And like you say, these horses stay in the race. There's not the abrasive kickback you get on dirt, so they're not discouraged running in behind. They punch up a little bit closer, and really it's about who has to turn a foot home to win the race. So it's not necessarily about pace. So what is it about when handicapping turf races? For me, I think jockeys are a little bit more important here than they are on the dirt. Pedigree is very important as well, and I know you're big on the pedigree angle on the grass.
Yeah, it's very important because, and I think there's a little bit of a difference between if we're talking about, routes and sprints. I think the pedigree obviously starts to matter a little bit longer as they go longer, but you still got to be able to handle the turf. That's the question from the very beginning, whether you're going short or whether you're going long. And, you talked about turn of foot. I think that's one of the big things because I'm one of the first to say, even in this day, pace still makes the race. That's still one of the first handicapping ideals. But I think the first sort of category of race where I'm starting to shy away from that a little is turf racing. Perhaps turf sprints. I think speed is still a big premium there. You can have 3-4 horses blazing on the front end and 2 or 3 of them hang around still. But, that turn of foot, you will see horses going 2 turns on the turf and horses go from last to first into a 51, 52 second half mile. In theory, that shouldn't happen on any racing surface, but on turf, turn of foot matters. And I think that's where watching replays matters too, because that turn of foot is not always going to show up, especially for some also-rans on those paper past performances. Watch those races and you'll see a couple horses handling the turf a little better, I think, than their past performances might indicate.
Yeah, and trip handicapping becomes a real boon to your handicapping arsenal when you're handicapping turf races. Bigger fields, obviously more traffic, more places to start and stop. I don't necessarily think wide trips are a bad thing on the turf because sometimes, down inside you get stopped. Momentum is a bugger, I mean, if you get holed up a couple times, it's hard for a horse to kind of come off and go on the gas. They're not cars, so a wide trip can sometimes be a good one. From a trip handicapping standpoint, I'm more impressed or more apt to bet a horse back who got stuck down on the inside, couldn't get out, that sort of thing, and was holed up the whole way. Than a horse who lost ground on the turn. Lost ground on the turf race doesn't bother me quite as much. Sharp turns on the turf course as it is. A lot of horses don't corner all that well. So I think wide trips are almost expected on the grass.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is, I was sort of talking about how I felt in turf sprints, pace doesn't matter as much. I think you bring up another good point where some of the maybe original fundamentals don't always apply to each exact topic or each exact type of race, and that's something that over the course of an entire season we can see the spots where those work and where those don't work. But the wide trip is completely right, because how many times do you see horses who do, they get sort of that Jerry Bailey mid-1990s hedge trip at Belmont, only they don't get out. They get stuck getting stopped 6-7 times, no chance. I very much with you on I'd rather have a wide trip where you don't have to stop and start than maybe a, on and off inside trip. But all that being said, the turf racing does offer you in that sense a little bit of a sort of different set of handicapping tools in the toolbox. Some of them don't apply the same way they do in dirt racing.
And when we get these European shippers come in, whether it's a Woodbine Mile or a Breeders' Cup or any day of the year, we get a lot of these invaders from Europe. They come over here a lot of times because they can't race on Lasix in Europe, and they're horses who have some bleeding problems. So you see most Euros come over here L1. Going longer on the turf and on softer turf are the places I want to look for the Europeans in American racing. The longer they go, there's more pedigrees, the Galileos, those kind of bloodlines that we see. Dane Hill coming to the U.S. I just think there's more distance pedigree with those horses. The longer, the better over there, and softer, the better. If the turf course is even the slightest bit soft in the U.S., you're not even allowed to get on it. Horses don't work on the grass that much in the U.S. In Europe, they're on it almost every single day of their life on softer turf. So even a horse who they say hates it soft in Europe, American soft to them is almost good to firm. So I really like the Europeans going longer on the turf, softer, and of course when they get Lasix for the first time. Your thoughts on some of the European angles?
Yeah, I think the distance, I completely agree with you. They have that advantage going long. I think speed is still sort of a great equalizer, and that's why you see in turf sprints the American horses, we can still kind of hold our own because maybe we don't have the turn of foot that some of those Euros have, but we have the sharp pace that not a lot of them do. But looking at European horses, one of the things that one of the really great sort of technological advances in racing over especially the last 10-12 years is that we aren't just relying on what's on paper when a horse shows up for the Woodbine Mile or for the Arlington Million or for the Breeders' Cup with a bunch of running lines from Ireland and the United Kingdom. Back then we kind of just had to look at the time form number. We had to look at the paper. We had to ask some friends who followed European racing. Now, if you just do a simple Google search for, the horse, put the horse's name in quotes, 9 times out of 10 you're going to be able to find at least a few of those races. And you generally, at least I've felt, you only need 2-3 races to get an idea of how a horse runs. Where do they like to sit in those packs? Do they travel comfortably when they're in hand? And what's their turn of foot like? And how do they finish those races? You can find almost all of these replays, so you can really kind of do your own research on Euros in a way that at least in the past we were never able to, and I think that's a huge advantage.
We talk that turn of foot expression a lot. Visually you see it, the horse accelerating through the lane. Turf races often finish faster than they start, which dirt races rarely ever do. They almost always run their fastest fractions first and decelerate as the races go. One thing you can look at from a past performance angle, I use the brisk past performances, the late pace figure, how fast the horse is running late in the race. I find that to be extremely effective handicapping tool, especially in grass races. So that late pace figure, no matter what product you use, but if you have the ability to get a late pace number, I think that can be a boon to you on the turf. Turf handicapping too, when it comes to the Europeans, one final point to put on that. Look at the jockeys who rode the horses over in Europe, because remember, they only run a couple days a week and they have smaller cards, right? 5, 6, 7 race cards in Europe. So there aren't that many mounts to be had over there. When the top jockeys, when Sumian and guys like Ryan Moore and the top jockeys are showing up on horses, those are the lead players. And when you see a trainer, maybe an Aidan O'Brien, who's got 3 or 4 horses in almost every single race, he's putting his best jockey on the best chance and down the line. So if you start to see a lot of a horse who maybe comes to the U.S. for Aidan O'Brien, but it's been the C-level jockey riding almost every single time in Europe, that will tell you that they don't think a lot of that horse compared to the ones that had Ryan Moore on all the time, or a Gosden-Sumian connection, something like that from a horse over in Europe. Check out who rode the horse in Europe when they come to the United States. Sometimes that can give you a little bit of sense of the talent. Finally, Brian, let's talk turf sprints for just a minute. What are you looking for on the turf sprint end?
9 times out of 10, I'm looking for speed and class. On turf sprints is one of the, I'm not a big class guy. I think turf sprints is a place where class can matter, but I'll never forget something that trainer Tom Amos told me, and he's been a guest on Night School in the past. He told me that he thinks the easiest type of horse to claim and move up is a turf sprinter, because it's easier on their legs. There's less that can go wrong. You just got to have the speed and get them in a good spot. So he's the kind of guy who goes looking for just a type of horse, not looking for pedigree necessarily. But that's always something that's stuck with me, is that you can turn a lot more horses into turf sprinters than you can into other types of horses.
Horses coming off turf races win about 13% of the time in turf sprints. Horses coming out of dirt win about 10%. So they throw a lot of dirt horses at you in turf sprints because of the distance. But remember, those turf horses tend to have a little bit more success. One trainer who's had a ton of success, a multiple Breeders' Cup sprint winning on the turf trainer, is Brett Calhoun. And we caught up with him at Monmouth during our night school tour years ago, and he taught us about handicapping and training horses for the turf and turf sprints. We'll have Brett Calhoun coming up next from the vault when we return to Caton Bredar joins us on this edition of Night School.
Pick, bet, and cheer on live racing from Woodbine and Mohawk Park. Thoroughbred and harness action. The wagers are just the beginning. Watch award-winning broadcasts covering both breeds, incredible battles contested over the most unique grass course in North America. Experience the full fields with over 130 thoroughbred and 160 live harness days. Get access to free handicapping material and join the ranks of Woodbine and Mohawk Park players from all over the globe. For more information, visit woodbine.com.
Strategize, analyze, select. Join Keeneland Select to bet on racing from around the world on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, anytime, anywhere. Featuring the best rewards in racing, free pass performances, live video, race replays, and more. Plus, Keeneland Select invests a portion of its profits back into the sport. Join Keeneland Select today and earn a $150 sign-up bonus at KeenelandSelect.com. Dedicated to the sport and dedicated to the players.
Some folks like to bet on the horses. Some like to bet on the games. Some folks like to bet on their phone, and some like to bet from their suite. So what's your best bet? All of the above. No matter how you like to bet, Remington Park is your best bet yet. With world-class horse racing, OKC's newest casino, and online suite booking now available. Remington Park, it's your best bet yet.
Hey, what's going on? Mikey here, and I'm going to tell you about an offer from my good friends at ExpressBet. Let's be honest, we know you love playing the races, but you can't always make it to the track. Sometimes life just gets in the way of a good bet. Well, what if I told you about a place where you never miss a bet and you start with house money? You'd say I'm crazy, right? Well, not at ExpressBet. Your first $100 are on them. That's right. Sign up with expressbet.com using promo code XBRadio, bet $100, and they'll deposit $100 back into your account the very next day. Hey, plus you could get an extra $25 if you use Express Fund Direct Deposit. You see what I mean? House money for betting the races. It's that easy. Check it out at expressbet.com to learn more. And don't forget to sign up with promo code XBRadio. You're gonna love it. And that's a Mikey guarantee. Must be 18 years or older and 21 years old in certain states to open an account with ExpressBet and reside in a state where such activity is legal. Void where prohibited. National Gambling Support Line 800-522-4700.
Welcome back to the show. Enjoy this classic night school clip from the vault.
I've just been lucky to have a few nice grass sprinters. Several years ago, I had Mr. Nightlinger. That was a very good grass sprinter. I think he was versatile. He was a horse that could do either thing. Things that make horses grass horses or dirt horses. I think, sometimes maybe his feet bothered him a little bit, and I think he tended to move forward on the grass because it was a little more comfortable for him. Then you move forward to Chamberlain Bridge. A similar situation with him. His pedigree really stuck out for the grass. I mean, top and bottom. And I think that has a lot to do with it. I think sometimes the kickback of the dirt horses don't like it, and you can put them on the turf, and there's not as much kickback. It's not as painful of a sting. So there again with Chamberlain Bridge, I think one of the reasons that made him a good turf horse was pedigree, but also he had 4 white feet. And that's the only thing that we really battled during his career was some quarter cracks here and there and tender feet. And I think that's another reason he thrived on the turf. Really don't train them a lot differently. The only thing you have to be aware of with training grass horses, you're training them on the dirt most of the time. We don't get the opportunity to breeze them, give speed works on the turf very often. And a lot of times these turf horses don't put their best foot forward on the dirt in the morning training. So you're always concerned about fitness sometimes. So you maybe want to train those horses a little differently, maybe put a few more miles in them, work them a little farther. The grass sprinters for me have been very, very easy. You're going 5.5. You can keep them fit pretty easily. But the two-turn horses, I think, can be an issue because you don't get a lot of them out of them in the morning in their breezes. Sometimes they just don't care for it and won't put a lot of effort into it.
Back here on Night School to close out our conversation about turf racing of all kinds. Joined again by Caton Bredar to put a bow on tonight's show. And Caton, we've covered a lot of ground tonight. Overall turf racing, turf sprints, a little bit of Euro handicapping. And we just heard from an interview you did with trainer Brett Calhoun a few years ago about some of his really good turf sprinters. And one of the things that you found interesting about this topic is really the way that turf sprints and turf routes play differently and how we need to categorize those two up against each other when we're talking about turf racing in general.
Yeah, because I think that when you boil it all down, if you really look at them separately and closely, you find that turf sprints typically play a lot more like a dirt sprint or like a dirt race, that you handicap for speed. You see how the pace unfolds and you kind of go from there. I think frequently the fastest horse wins, whether it's a turf sprint or a dirt sprint. So the key is finding the fastest horse. Or, if there's so much speed, finding the horse that can come from a little bit off of it. But I also believe that, and I'm not quite sure I completely understand this, but I've just seen it play out so many times, that a horse who tries the turf, let's say he's a dirt sprinter specialist, has never been on the turf. A lot of times, those horses are able to win or be successful if they're good enough just because they're good enough, not because they like the turf. I find that horses who really aren't turf horses, truly, are still able to get away with it in sprints. And maybe it's just because the emphasis is on speed rather than their affinity for the surface. But I think you don't see that happen in turf routes. When you start hitting 7 furlongs or particularly 2-turn races, a mile or more, that's when you really have to have a horse who has an affinity or a high confidence level on the turf. And that's when speed isn't as important. I really think that's when you can start playing more off turf pedigrees. You still have to consider pace. And certainly pace makes the race in any situation. But I think the longer the turf race in particular, the less likely you are to ever see anybody steal it. Even lone speed sometimes falters on the grass. And I think you just need ability. You need to look at how the race unfolds pace-wise, and you need to focus on the horses who are truly exceptional on the turf and then weigh them one against the other. Pace does matter in the turf races, but it's more pace in the middle of the race and the end, and whether the jock was able to get a horse to relax at some stage in the race to have something left for the finish on the longer grass races, especially when you get into marathons. But even when you're talking a mile and a 16th, I see less and less often that you're going to be able to steal anything or you're going to see a lone speed horse go gate to wire.
And Caton saying that emphasis on speed matters quite a bit more there in turf sprints, and so that maybe gives you a chance to get some of those horses who may not look like they're going to love the turf, but may be quick enough and in sharp enough form to be able to play with those types of horses. This is going to wrap it up for our turf episode here on Season 9 of Night School. We'll be back next week to talk pick 3s, pick 4s, and pick 5s.
Next on FAQ 60, class. The class of an American quarter horse is determined no differently than runners of other breeds. At what level of racing does the horse fit in terms of being most competitive? By answering that question, handicappers determine how the competition stacks up. Horses are maidens until they win for the first time. The class ladder is climbed from claiming races to allowance races, stakes trials, and eventually stakes races, with graded stakes the top rung of the class ladder. Simply put, a very fast horse can be more competitive at most any class level the shorter the distance. The longer the distance, the more emphasis a horse player should put on class. Also, don't fear a young horse making a class rise. We don't know their talent ceiling just yet. This FAQ 60 is brought to you by AQHA Racing and Horse Player Now.
Enjoy tonight's episode? Check out hundreds of past archives at horseplayernow.com.